The acrid smoke of burning villages drifted across the Korean countryside as Lieutenant Colonel John Michaelis peered through his binoculars at the approaching North Korean forces. It was July 27, 1950, and the Communist Army had swept through Seoul like an unstoppable tide, pushing American and South Korean forces ever southward. Now with their backs to the sea at the port city of Pusan, the United Nations forces faced their most desperate hour. General Walton Walker, commander of the 8th Army, had drawn a line in the Korean soil literally. The Pusan perimeter, a roughly rectangular defensive line stretching from the Korea Strait to the mountains north of Taegu, represented the last bastion of resistance on the peninsula. Beyond this line lay only the cold waters of the Korea Strait and the bitter taste of defeat. The morning mist clung to the hills as Walker addressed his commanders in a cramped schoolhouse that served as temporary headquarters. His voice carried the weight of desperation, mixed with steely determination. "There will be no more retreating," he declared, his weathered face etched with resolve. "We fight or we die here." The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of artillery. Every man present understood the gravity of their situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Captain Robert Barrow of the 1st Marine Provisional Brigade watched as refugees streamed past his position, their faces hollow with fear and exhaustion. Among them, he spotted families carrying everything they owned on their backs, children clutching makeshift toys, and elderly citizens who had lived through Japanese occupation only to face this new nightmare. The sight hardened his resolve. This wasn't just about military strategy or geopolitical chess. Moves real people's lives hung in the balance. The North Korean People's Army, under the command of Marshal Cho Yong-gon, had achieved remarkable success in their initial offensive. Their Soviet-supplied T-34 tanks had proven devastatingly effective against poorly equipped South Korean forces, and their disciplined infantry had overwhelmed defensive positions with shocking speed. Intelligence reports suggested they numbered over 90,000 troops, seasoned by years of fighting in the Chinese Civil War. As night fell over the perimeter, Private First Class William Richardson of the 24th Infantry Division cleaned his Garand rifle with methodical precision. Around him, other soldiers wrote letters home, knowing they might be their last. The air was thick with tension and the smell of diesel fuel from the supply trucks that worked frantically to bring ammunition and medical supplies to forward positions. Richardson had been in Korea for only 3 weeks, part of the hastily assembled Task Force Smith that had suffered devastating losses in the first encounters with North Korean forces. He had seen friends die, watched positions overrun, and experienced the chaos of retreat under fire. Now dug into a hillside overlooking the Naktong River, he waited for what many believed would be the final battle of the Korean conflict. The perimeter itself was a marvel of desperate engineering, stretching roughly 140 miles. In circumference, it encompassed critical transportation hubs, supply depots, and the vital port of Pusan through which all reinforcements and supplies flowed. American engineers worked around the clock to fortify positions, lay minefields, and establish communication lines that would prove crucial in the coming battle. As Richardson settled into his foxhole, he could hear the distant sound of North Korean mortar beginning their nightly harassment. Tomorrow would bring another day of fighting, another test of will and courage. What he didn't know was that his stand, along with thousands of other Allied soldiers, would become one of the most significant defensive actions in modern military history, a symbol of determination that would resonate far beyond the Korean peninsula. Dawn broke on August 1, 1950, with the thunder of North Korean artillery echoing across the Naktong River Valley. Lieutenant General Kim Chak had massed his forces for what he believed would be the final push to drive the United Nations troops into the sea. His 4th Infantry Division, supported by the fearsome 3rd Armored Division, began their assault on the northwestern sector of the Pusan perimeter with a ferocity that shook the earth itself. Sergeant Major James Mitchell of the 27th Infantry Regiment felt the ground tremble beneath his boots as the communist barrage intensified. Shells whistled overhead like banshees, exploding in brilliant orange flashes that illuminated the pre-dawn darkness. "Here they come!" shouted a voice from somewhere down the line, and Mitchell raised his binoculars to witness a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Across the muddy waters of the Naktong, North Korean soldiers poured forward like a human tide. Their distinctive uniforms and peaked caps were clearly visible in the growing light as they waded through the shallow river, assault rifles held high above their heads. Behind them, the distinctive silhouettes of T-34 tanks emerged from concealed positions, their engines roaring as they prepared to cross at designated fording points. The initial crossing caught some Allied positions off guard. Despite intelligence warnings, Colonel Paul Freeman's 23rd Infantry Regiment found itself under tremendous pressure as North Korean forces established multiple bridgeheads along their sector. The sound of gunfire became a continuous roar, punctuated by the distinctive crack of sniper rifles and the hollow thump of mortar rounds, according to historical accounts. Documented in the Korean War by Bruce Cummings, the North Korean strategy relied heavily on night infiltration tactics and massed infantry, assaults designed to overwhelm defensive positions through sheer numbers. Their commanders had studied American defensive patterns and identified what they believed were critical weak points in the perimeter's northern approaches. Private Maria Santos, a medic with the 8th Army Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, witnessed the first waves of casualties as they arrived at her aid station. The wounded came in trucks, jeeps, and sometimes carried by their comrades on improvised stretchers. Burns from napalm, shrapnel wounds from artillery, and the devastating injuries caused by small arms fire, she had seen it all in her brief time in Korea. But the scale of casualties from the Naktong crossing was unprecedented. The battle for the river crossings evolved into a series of desperate small unit actions. Captain Charles Mount led his company of the 9th Infantry Regiment in a counterattack against a North Korean position that had seized a crucial hill overlooking their supply route. Armed with bazookas and supported by artillery fire from the 159th Field Artillery Battalion, Mount's men fought their way up the steep slopes under intense enemy fire. The fighting was particularly fierce around the town of Wegwon, where North Korean forces had managed to establish a substantial foothold on the southern bank of the Naktong. Staff Sergeant Robert Hutchinson found himself commanding a squad of mixed American and South Korean troops after his lieutenant was killed in the opening minutes of the assault. Language barriers made coordination difficult, but the universal language of survival transcended all other communication. As the day progressed, the North Korean offensive began to show signs of coordination problems. Their initial success in crossing the river had not been followed up with adequate supplies of ammunition and fuel. The T-34 tanks that had seemed so formidable in the morning light were now running low on fuel, and several had been knocked out by determined bazooka teams and recently arrived M26 Pershing tanks. By evening, the situation remained critical but not hopeless. General Walker had committed his reserve forces to contain the most dangerous penetrations, and air support from the Far East Air Forces had begun to take a toll on North Korean supply lines. Fighter bombers strafed enemy positions throughout the day, their rockets and machine guns disrupting attempts to reinforce the bridgeheads. The first day of the Great Offensive had ended with mixed results for both sides. The North Koreans had achieved their initial objective of crossing the Naktong in force, but they had not broken through the perimeter as decisively as their commanders had hoped. For the defenders, survival through the first day felt like a small victory. Though everyone knew that more difficult days lay ahead, the morning of August 6, 1950, brought no respite from the relentless North Korean pressure. Colonel Mike Michaelis of the 27th Infantry Regiment received urgent reports that enemy forces had infiltrated deep into his sector during the night. What followed would become one of the most celebrated individual acts of heroism in the entire Korean conflict. Master Sergeant Ernest Koma was manning a roadblock near Agok when North Korean infantry, supported by T-34 tanks, launched a coordinated assault on his position. Armed only with a 75mm recoilless rifle and unlimited determination, Koma single-handedly engaged the approaching armor. His first shot disabled the lead tank, blocking the narrow road and forcing the others to maneuver around it. For the next hour, Koma continued his one-man stand against overwhelming odds. He destroyed a second tank with a direct hit to its engine compartment, then turned his weapon on the supporting infantry. When North Korean soldiers attempted to flank his position, he abandoned the recoilless rifle and fought with his carbine, picking off targets with the precision of a trained marksman. His actions bought precious time for reinforcements to arrive and prevented a potentially catastrophic breakthrough. The heroism displayed during these critical days wasn't limited to dramatic individual actions. Technical Sergeant Raymond Harvey, of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment, demonstrated the kind of steady leadership that kept units together under impossible circumstances. When his company commander was wounded during a North Korean night attack, Harvey assumed command and organized a fighting withdrawal that saved dozens of lives. Dr. Mary Chun, a South Korean civilian doctor who had volunteered to work with American medical units, embodied the international character of the defense. Working in a field hospital just miles behind the front lines, she treated wounded soldiers regardless of nationality, often under direct enemy fire. Her calm professionalism and medical expertise saved countless lives during the most intense periods of fighting. The battle also revealed the crucial importance of close air support in modern warfare. Captain John Glenn, flying an F-80 Shooting Star with the 51st Fighter Wing, participated in numerous close support missions that helped blunt North Korean attacks. His squadron's ability to deliver precise strikes against enemy positions often made the difference between successful defense and catastrophic breakthrough. According to documentation preserved in the National Archives and referenced in multiple military histories, the period from August 6 to August 10 represented the most critical phase of the entire Pusan perimeter defense. North Korean forces had achieved multiple penetrations of the defensive line and seemed poised to achieve their goal of driving United Nations forces into the sea. The intensity of combat during this period defied description. Sergeant Ralph Blumberg, of the 2nd Infantry Division, found himself in continuous contact with enemy forces for 72 hours straight. His unit had been cut off from resupply, and ammunition was running critically low. "We counted every bullet," he later recalled. "Every shot had to count because we knew there might not be another one." The psychological pressure on defenders was immense. Captain Robert Taplett, of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment, watched as exhausted soldiers fell asleep at their posts, despite the constant sound of gunfire. Some men had been fighting for weeks without adequate rest, surviving on combat rations and whatever water they could find. Yet amidst the chaos and desperation, acts of remarkable courage continued to emerge. Corporal David Carey of the 19th Infantry Regiment crawled across open ground under heavy fire to rescue a wounded comrade who had been left behind during a hasty withdrawal. His journey back to friendly lines took over 4 hours, during which he carried the unconscious soldier on his back while avoiding North Korean patrols. The defense of Hill 203 became legendary among the units involved. Lieutenant William Jones led a platoon of mixed American and South Korean troops in a desperate defense of this strategically vital position. For 3 days and nights, they held off repeated North Korean assaults, often fighting with bayonets when ammunition ran low. When relief finally arrived, Jones and his men had held their ground despite being outnumbered 10 to 1. these individual acts of heroism, multiplied across hundreds of similar positions throughout the perimeter, began to create a collective momentum that would ultimately prove decisive. The North Korean offensive, despite its initial success, was beginning to lose steam against the determined resistance of United Nations forces. By August 15, 1950, the character of the battle had begun to shift subtly but significantly. General Douglas MacArthur's bold decision to land the 1st Marine Division at Incheon was still weeks away, but changes in tactics and the arrival of reinforcements were already making their presence felt along the Pusan perimeter. Colonel John Throckmorton of the 5th Regimental Combat Team had spent weeks studying North Korean attack patterns, and his analysis was beginning to pay dividends. "They're predictable," he explained to his battalion commanders during a hastily convened briefing. "They attack at dawn, they follow the same routes, and they don't adapt quickly when their initial plans fail." This intelligence would prove crucial in the coming days. The arrival of the 1st Marine Provisional Brigade under Brigadier General Edward Craig marked a turning point in both morale and tactical capability. These battle-tested veterans brought with them not only superior training and equipment, but also an aggressive mindset that contrasted sharply with the defensive mentality that had characterized much of the fighting to date. Staff Sergeant John Odes of the 5th Marine Regiment exemplified this new aggressive approach. Leading a reinforced squad in a night patrol behind enemy lines, Odes and his men gathered critical intelligence about North Korean troop dispositions and supply routes. More importantly, they began conducting harassment operations that disrupted enemy sleep and logistics, gradually wearing down the Communist forces' effectiveness. Technical Sergeant William Windrick of the 2nd Infantry Division pioneered them. Use of coordinated artillery and airstrikes that would become standard doctrine in later conflicts. Working closely with forward air controllers, Windrick developed techniques for bringing devastating firepower to bear on North Korean positions with unprecedented accuracy. His methods reduced the casualty rate among attacking Allied forces, while maximizing damage to enemy defenses. The psychological impact of sustained combat was becoming apparent on both sides. Captain Samuel Marshall, conducting interviews with frontline soldiers, documented the gradual shift in confidence among United Nations forces. "The men are starting to believe they can win," he noted in his official report. 3 weeks ago, they were just trying to survive. Now they're thinking about how to hurt the enemy. Intelligence reports indicated that North Korean forces were experiencing significant supply problems. The constant air attacks on their logistics lines, combined with the extended nature of their offensive operations, had stretched their capabilities to the breaking point. Prisoners of war reported shortages of ammunition, medical supplies, and even basic food rations. Major Robert Barrow led a crucial counterattack on August 18th that recaptured Hill 179, a position that commanded vital supply routes. His Marines advanced under cover of naval gunfire from destroyers positioned off the coast, demonstrating the growing coordination between different branches of Allied forces. The success of this operation provided concrete proof that North Korean forces could be defeated in direct combat. The role of South Korean forces was also becoming increasingly important. Colonel Paik Sun-yup of the 1st Republic of Korea Division had reorganized his scattered units into an effective fighting force. His soldiers' local knowledge and language skills proved invaluable in intelligence gathering and coordination with civilian populations still trapped within the perimeter. According to military historians including Clay Blair, whose comprehensive study, The Forgotten War, provides detailed analysis of this period, the 3rd week of August marked the beginning of the end for the North Korean offensive. Communist forces had achieved tactical successes but had failed to translate these into strategic breakthrough that their commanders desperately needed. The improved performance of Allied forces wasn't solely due to better tactics and leadership. New equipment was arriving daily through Pusan harbor, including more effective anti-tank weapons, improved communications equipment, and additional artillery pieces. The M26 Pershing tanks proved particularly effective against the North Korean T-34s, finally giving Allied forces the armor superiority they needed. Private Thomas Rodriguez of the 7th Infantry Division experienced this shift firsthand. 2 weeks ago, we were just hoping to make it through each day, he wrote to his family. Now we're talking about when we're going to start pushing them back. The whole feeling is different. We're not just defending anymore, we're getting ready to attack. As August drew to a close, it became clear that the North Korean offensive had reached its high-water mark. Despite achieving significant tactical gains and inflicting heavy casualties, they had failed to break the will of the defenders or achieve the decisive breakthrough needed to drive United Nations forces from the peninsula. September 1st, 1950, dawned with an unusual quiet along the Naktong River front. For the first time in weeks, North Korean artillery seemed less intense, and their probing attacks lacked the fierce determination that had characterized the earlier phase of the battle. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moore sensed the change immediately as he surveyed the battlefield from his command post, overlooking the river valley. "Something's different," Moore confided to his operations officer, Captain David Hackworth. Intelligence reports had been indicating increasing North Korean supply problems for days, but now the evidence was becoming visible on the battlefield itself. Abandoned equipment, reduced artillery fire, and reports from patrol units all pointed to the same conclusion. The communist offensive was running out of steam. The transformation was most apparent in the aggressive patrolling activities initiated by Allied units. Sergeant First Class Hiroshi Miyamura of the 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, led numerous night reconnaissance missions that penetrated deep into North Korean-held territory. These patrols not only gathered valuable intelligence but also demonstrated growing Allied confidence and tactical superiority. Captain Lewis Millett of the 27th Infantry Regiment embodied the new offensive spirit sweeping through United Nations forces. His company had been decimated during the initial North Korean crossings, but reinforcements and improved tactics had restored it to fighting effectiveness. More importantly, Millett had developed innovative small unit tactics that maximized the effectiveness of combined arms operations. The arrival of additional British Commonwealth forces marked another significant milestone in the battle's evolution. The 27th British Commonwealth Brigade, under Brigadier Basil Code, brought not only additional manpower but also different tactical approaches developed during World War II. Their experience in jungle warfare and night operations proved particularly valuable in the Korean terrain. Major Kenneth Muir of the 1st Battalion, Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, demonstrated the international character of the defense during a crucial action on September 12. Leading a mixed force of British, American, and South Korean troops, Muir coordinated a complex defensive operation that stopped the last major North Korean attempt to break through the perimeter's northwestern sector. The effectiveness of Allied air power was reaching unprecedented levels. Colonel John Meyer of the 4th Fighter Wing had perfected close air support techniques that allowed fighter bombers to operate within hundreds of yards of friendly positions. His pilot's ability to deliver precise strikes against North Korean positions was gradually shifting the tactical balance in favor of the defenders. Medical advances were also contributing to improved morale and effectiveness. Lieutenant Colonel Karen Wagner, one of the first female physicians to serve in a combat zone, had established treatment protocols that significantly reduced casualty rates among wounded soldiers. Her mobile surgical units, operating just behind the front lines, saved countless lives that would have been lost in earlier conflicts. The psychological warfare aspect of the battle was becoming increasingly important. Captain Robert Burns of the 1st Radio Broadcasting and Leaflet Group had developed propaganda campaigns specifically targeted at North Korean soldiers. Surrender leaflets and radio broadcasts, exploiting supply shortages and communication problems, were beginning to show measurable results. Intelligence gathered from prisoners of war and defectors painted a picture of increasing demoralization within North Korean ranks. Corporal Kim Jong-sik, a North Korean soldier who surrendered on September 10th, reported that his unit had received no resupply for over a week and that many soldiers were subsisting on foraged food and captured American rations, according to documentation from the Center of Military History and referenced in SLA Marshall's The River and the Gauntlet. The period from September 1st to September 5th represented the crucial turning point where defensive success transformed into offensive opportunity. The sustained pressure of the Pusan perimeter defense had finally achieved its strategic objective. The logistical advantages enjoyed by United Nations forces were becoming overwhelming. Pusan Harbor continued to function at maximum capacity, bringing in supplies, reinforcements, and equipment. In contrast, North Korean supply lines stretched across hundreds of miles of territory, subjected to constant air attack. The mathematical equation of warfare was inexorably shifting in favor of the defenders. General Walton Walker began planning for the inevitable counteroffensive that would break out of the perimeter. His staff officers were developing ambitious plans that would coordinate with MacArthur's planned Incheon landing to create a devastating pincer movement against North Korean forces. The same officers who had been planning desperate defensive measures just weeks earlier were now calculating how to destroy an entire enemy army. As September progressed, it became clear that the Battle of Pusan perimeter had achieved something far more significant than mere survival. It had demonstrated the resilience of democratic nations when faced with totalitarian aggression, and it had proven that determined defenders could prevail against overwhelming odds when supported by superior logistics, technology, and international cooperation. September 16, 1950, marked the beginning of a dramatic reversal that would transform the entire strategic situation on the Korean peninsula. General Walton Walker had spent weeks planning the breakout from the Pusan perimeter, and now, with intelligence reports confirming North Korean weakness, he gave the order that Allied forces had been waiting to hear: attack. The offensive began, with the most intensive artillery barrage of the entire Korean conflict. Colonel Charles Palmer's artillery units had been accumulating ammunition for weeks, and now hundreds of guns opened fire simultaneously along multiple sectors of the front. The ground shook with such violence that soldiers reported feeling the vibrations. Miles behind the lines, Major General William Keene's 25th Infantry Division spearheaded the initial assault across the Naktong River. Leading the advance, Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Murch of the 35th Infantry Regiment watched as his men crossed the same waters where North Korean forces had seemed unstoppable just weeks earlier. The difference in confidence and capability was remarkable. Psychological impact on North Korean forces was immediate and devastating. Sergeant Lee Dong-won, a North Korean prisoner captured during the first day of the offensive, later described the shock of facing a coordinated Allied attack after weeks of barely maintaining their own positions. "We thought the Americans were finished," he admitted during interrogation. "We never expected them to attack with such strength." Medical support for the offensive represented a significant improvement over earlier operations. Colonel Mary Walker had established forward medical stations that moved with the advancing troops, reducing evacuation times and saving lives that might have been lost during longer transport to rear area hospitals. Her mobile surgical teams operated within miles of the fighting, often under direct fire. Intelligence operations during the offensive revealed the extent of North Korean collapse. Captain James Anderson's interrogation teams reported that many prisoners seemed relieved to be captured, describing conditions within their units as desperate. Ammunition shortages, communication breakdowns, and command confusion had created chaos within North Korean ranks. The speed of the Allied advance began to create new opportunities and challenges. As units moved forward rapidly, they often bypassed North Korean positions that had been isolated by the offensive. These scattered enemy forces had to be dealt with by follow-up units, while the main advance continued toward more strategic objectives. Major Robert Taplett of the 5th Marine Regiment participated in one of the most dramatic advances of the offensive. His battalion advanced over 15 miles in 2 days, capturing vital road junctions and preventing North Korean forces from establishing new defensive lines. The Marines' aggressive pursuit tactics prevented the enemy from regrouping after their initial defeats. According to military historians including Roy Appelman, whose definitive work South to the Naktong, North to the Yalu provides comprehensive documentation of this period, the September offensive marked one of the most successful military operations in American history. The transformation from desperate defense to overwhelming offense demonstrated the resilience and adaptability of Allied forces. By September 22nd, less than a week after the offensive began, Allied forces had advanced over 30 miles in some sectors and had effectively destroyed the North Korean army as an organized fighting force. The Battle of Pusan perimeter had ended not with evacuation or negotiated withdrawal, but with complete victory. September 26, 1950, witnessed the link-up between forces breaking out of the Pusan perimeter and General MacArthur's troops advancing south from the Incheon landing. When Captain John Sherman of the 7th Cavalry Regiment shook hands with Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Murray of the 5th Marine Regiment near the town of Suwon, they were not merely greeting fellow soldiers, they were marking the end of one of the most significant defensive operations in military history. The statistical magnitude of the Allied achievement was staggering. Over the course of 55 days, United Nations forces had withstood attacks by more than 90,000 North Korean troops, survived the loss of most of South Korea, and then launched a counteroffensive that destroyed the invading army. As an effective fighting force, the transformation from near defeat to overwhelming victory represented one of the most dramatic reversals in modern warfare. General Walton Walker, addressing his assembled commanders in the same schoolhouse where he had issued his famous "Stand or Die" order weeks earlier, reflected on the significance of their achievement. "We came here as separate units from different nations," he observed. "We leave as a unified force that has proven democracy's ability to defend itself against totalitarian aggression." His words would prove prophetic as the Pusan perimeter defense became a symbol of Allied resolve during the Cold War. The human cost of the victory was sobering. American casualties during the battle exceeded 14,000 killed, wounded, and missing. South Korean military and civilian losses were far higher, with entire communities displaced or destroyed during the fighting. British Commonwealth forces suffered proportionally heavy casualties, despite their later arrival in the theater. These sacrifices gave moral weight to the strategic victory. Staff Sergeant Ernest Coma, whose heroic actions during the August fighting had earned him the Medal of Honor, represented thousands of individual soldiers whose courage had made victory possible. In later interviews, Coma consistently deflected personal credit, insisting that the real heroes were the guys who didn't make it home. His humility became characteristic of many Pusan perimeter veterans. The battle's impact extended far beyond the Korean peninsula. Colonel Matthew Ridgway, then serving as Deputy Chief of Staff of the United States Army, studied the Pusan perimeter defense extensively as he prepared for his own command in Korea. Tactical innovations and leadership principles demonstrated during the battle would influence American military doctrine for decades. The international cooperation displayed during the defense became a model for future Allied operations. British, Canadian, Australian, Turkish, Filipino, and Thai forces had fought alongside American and South Korean troops with unprecedented coordination. This multinational partnership provided concrete evidence that the United Nations could function as an effective military alliance. Dr. Paul Nitze, director of the State Department's policy planning staff, analyzed the Pusan perimeter's strategic implications in his classified report to President Truman. According to declassified documents referenced in multiple diplomatic histories, Nitze concluded that the successful defense had fundamentally altered global perceptions of American resolve and capability in the face of communist expansion. Technological lessons learned during the battle influenced military development for years. The effectiveness of close air support, the importance of reliable communications, and the value of superior logistics all became central elements of American military doctrine. These innovations would prove crucial in subsequent conflicts throughout the Cold War period. Lieutenant General James Gavin, analyzing the battle for the Army War College, identified the Pusan perimeter defense as a watershed moment in modern warfare. The integration of air power, armor, artillery, and infantry had reached new levels of sophistication, while the multinational character of the force had proven that diverse military traditions could be successfully combined. The legacy of the Pusan perimeter extended into civilian society as well. Veterans of the battle would go on to leadership positions in business, education, and government, carrying with them the lessons learned during those desperate weeks in Korea. Their experience of successful defense against overwhelming odds would influence American attitudes toward international commitments for generations. The moral dimension of the victory resonated throughout the democratic world. The fact that free nations had successfully defended a smaller democracy against totalitarian aggression provided powerful propaganda advantages during the ideological struggle of the Cold War. The image of American, British, Canadian, and other Allied soldiers fighting alongside South Korean troops became a symbol of international solidarity. Captain Robert Barrow, who would later become Commandant of the Marine Corps, reflected on the battle's significance in his memoirs. Pusan taught us that free men, properly led and adequately supplied, could defeat any enemy regardless of the odds. That lesson served us well in all the conflicts that followed. His assessment captured the enduring strategic importance of the victory. The Battle of Pusan perimeter had begun with desperate defensive preparations and the very real possibility of complete defeat. It ended with total victory and the restoration of South Korean independence. More importantly, it had demonstrated that democratic nations possess the will and capability to defend their values against totalitarian aggression, a lesson that would echo throughout the remainder of the 20th century.